The morning sun had not yet burned away the mist that clung to the sugarcane fields of Brenton County when 19-year-old Allison Granger steered bus 42 along Route 17. It was October 12, 2001, a Friday that began with the ordinary rituals of rural Georgia life: diesel fumes, the chatter of elementary students, and the smell of wet soil rising from the furrows. Allison had been driving the same route since August, replacing a veteran driver who'd retired after 30 years. Her father had joked that she was the youngest driver on the oldest bus in the county. She laughed then, unaware that this route through the quiet farmland would become the axis of a mystery that would haunt Brenton County for 2 decades. Witnesses agreed that her final morning was unremarkable. The children she drove remembered the hum of pop radio through the static-filled speakers, the usual warnings to stay seated, the quick smile in the mirror when someone sneezed. Before we continue this shocking story, take a second to hit subscribe and like this video. Your support helps bring these forgotten stories to light, and the algorithm gods will make sure you don't miss any future uploads. At 7:42 a.m., the bus rolled past the old grain silo and stopped at Willow Bend Road, the last pickup before the highway turn. By 8:03 a.m., Allison had delivered the last of her 18 students to Brenton Elementary and waved at Principal Connor through the driver's window. At 8:07, the bus was seen heading west on Route 17, empty, toward the depot where the drivers parked between runs. It never arrived. The next vehicle to travel that road, a delivery truck from Langford Feed Supply, found the bus 40 minutes later, pulled neatly onto the shoulder with its hazard lights blinking. The driver, a man named Peter Lang, assumed it was a mechanical issue. When he stepped inside, he found the ignition off, the keys still in the switch, the driver's seat empty, and Allison's reflective vest draped over the steering wheel. The contact was locked, but there was no sign of struggle, no broken glass, no scattered belongings. The two-way radio sat silent, its cord neatly coiled. Lang radioed dispatch, who alerted the sheriff's office at 8:58 a.m. Within 20 minutes, Deputy Roy Hill arrived, took one look at the bus, and called it the strangest damn scene he'd seen in his 14 years. Allison's purse lay on the second seat behind the driver's row, zipped and untouched. Her cell phone, a thick silver Nokia, rested on the dashboard, charging. The driver's side door was closed from the inside. There were no footprints in the soft shoulder mud leading away from the bus, only the faint tire tracks of Lang's truck and the heavy tread of Deputy Hill's patrol boots. The sugarcane stretched 10 feet high on both sides, swaying slightly in the humid air, concealing whatever secrets the road might have held. Sheriff Tom Landers arrived by 9:30 and ordered an immediate perimeter search. By noon, local volunteers, deputies, and K-9 units combed the surrounding acreage. The dogs picked up a scent that followed the road for about 50 yards before veering sharply into the cane, where it vanished as abruptly as it had begun. Searchers found a small plastic ID card trampled into the mud near the edge of the field. It bore the emblem of the Georgia Highway Patrol and the name Trooper David Keene. But when Landers radioed headquarters, they confirmed no such trooper existed. The badge number was fictitious, the lamination crude. The fake ID was the only physical clue recovered that day. By dusk, news crews had arrived from Savannah and Macon, their satellite vans parked along the narrow highway. The story of the missing bus driver spread quickly through Brenton County's 3,000 residents, a community bound by church socials and high school football. The idea that someone could vanish in broad daylight from a locked vehicle on an open road bordered by nothing but sugarcane fields seemed impossible. Allison's parents, Ray and Marla Granger, arrived at the scene around 6 p.m., escorted by Pastor Hewitt from the First Baptist Church. Ray, a retired truck mechanic with hands permanently stained by diesel grease, demanded to see the bus. Sheriff Landers refused, citing contamination risks. "She's just a kid," Ray said, his voice hoarse. "She wouldn't run." Investigators worked under portable floodlights through the night. Forensics technicians photographed every inch of the bus interior, dusted the steering wheel and door handles, and collected hair and fiber samples from the driver's seat. The engine compartment showed no mechanical failure. The fuel gauge read 3/4 full. The odometer confirmed no unauthorized mileage. The vehicle was, in every measurable way, perfectly ordinary. Only its missing driver made it extraordinary. The next morning, state police joined the investigation. Helicopters with infrared sensors scanned the cane fields, while divers examined irrigation canals and drainage ditches. Nothing. The cane was harvested in late October, revealing nothing but trampled soil and fragments of tire tread from the search vehicles. The investigation's first week produced more questions than answers. Several witnesses reported seeing a dark-colored sedan parked along Route 17 around the time Allison disappeared, its headlights off, facing the opposite direction. One farmer, Earl Pritchard, claimed he'd glimpsed a uniformed figure standing near the bus that morning. "Thought it was a trooper helping her," he told deputies. Had one of them high-vis vests, radio clipped to the shoulder. But state records confirmed that no highway patrol units were scheduled in the area that day. The uniform description, gray shirt, navy trousers, campaign hat, matched standard issue, yet the county sheriff's office didn't own that style, and no neighboring agency claimed it. The false ID found near the field became the investigation's focal point. The photo showed a man in his 40s with close-cropped hair and an impassive expression. The background was an office wall, beige with a certificate half visible behind his shoulder. The forensics lab determined the photo paper was from a consumer inkjet printer. The lamination plastic was the same type sold at the local Staples in Valdosta. Investigators canvassed office supply stores within 50 miles, searching for recent purchases of lamination sheets and badge holders. One clerk remembered selling a pack to some kind of maintenance guy who mentioned state inspection forms. Surveillance cameras were grainy, the footage overwritten after 30 days. The trail ended in static. The Granger family transformed their home into a command post. The kitchen table became an operations map covered with printouts and sticky notes. Allison's friends from high school organized volunteer searches, distributing flyers that featured her school portrait. Brown hair in a ponytail, hazel eyes, a half-smile that seemed caught between childhood and adulthood. Ray and Marla appeared on local television, pleading for information. "Allie never met a stranger," her mother said. If someone told her they needed help, she'd stop. That sentence would echo through every subsequent report, shaping the narrative of a girl too kind for her own safety. The first major theory emerged from a chilling coincidence. 2 weeks before Allison vanished, another young woman in neighboring Calhoun County had reported being pulled over on a rural road by what she believed was an unmarked patrol car. The driver wore a gray uniform and flashed a badge before asking her to step out of the vehicle. She grew suspicious when he demanded her license without identifying his department. When she refused, he abruptly returned to his car and drove off. The woman, a college sophomore named Tessa Rudd, had filed a report with Calhoun deputies, who dismissed it as mistaken identity. After Allison's disappearance, Tessa's account resurfaced, and the description matched the man on the fake ID. For the first time, investigators considered that someone was impersonating law enforcement to target women traveling alone on rural routes. State authorities issued a public warning urging residents to verify any officer's credentials before complying with traffic stops. It was a statement both necessary and terrifying for communities that had trusted uniforms without question for generations. As October turned to November, leads dwindled. The bus was impounded in a secure facility in Macon. FBI analysts joined to construct behavioral profiles. They concluded that the perpetrator likely had law enforcement training or close familiarity with police procedures. He'd known how to stop a large vehicle safely and how to appear authoritative long enough to disarm suspicion. The lack of struggle suggested that Allison had stepped off the bus willingly, believing she was obeying legitimate instruction. After that, the trail went cold. No ransom, no communication, no remains. The fields went quiet again, the road reopened, and Brenton County tried to return to its routines, though the sight of Bus 42's empty route sign each morning served as a daily wound. Over the next years, time layered dust over evidence and replaced urgency with myth. Children who'd once ridden Allison's bus grew into adults who told newcomers the story of the driver who vanished on the road between the fields. The fake ID, preserved in an evidence envelope, became a symbol of the case's futility, an image of authority turned deceitful. But the truth about what happened on that mist-shrouded October morning would remain buried for 18 years, waiting for technology and persistence to uncover it. And when it finally surfaced, the revelation would fracture Brenton County's quiet trust in law enforcement, revealing that evil had been wearing a badge all along. The first winter after Allison Granger's disappearance settled over Brenton County with the quiet finality of a lid closing on an unsolved riddle. The cane fields stood bare, their stubbled remains cutting through the frost like 1,000 broken promises. Sheriff Landers, once certain the case would resolve, within weeks began avoiding questions from reporters and townspeople alike. The yellow ribbons that had adorned mailboxes along Route 17 had faded to the color of old paper, yet Marla Granger still replaced the one on her front porch every Sunday before church. Inside the sheriff's department, the whiteboard labeled bus driver case remained untouched since November, its bullet points now ghostly under the fluorescent lights. The fake patrol ID rested in an evidence envelope inside the department safe, its photo of Trooper David Keene staring out with lifeless authority. Landers hated that photograph. It was the one artifact that reminded him how fragile trust could be in a place where everyone believed they knew who was who. By early 2002, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation had taken the lead. Special Agent Miriam Cole, a 38-year-old profiler from Atlanta, arrived with a rolling case of files and a voice recorder she never turned off. Cole's arrival split the community between those grateful for outside help and those who saw it as an indictment of local competence. She spent her first week interviewing every deputy, every driver at the bus depot, and every parent who'd seen Allison's route that morning. Her notes filled 3 binders by the end of the month. She was methodical, calm, and relentless in a way that unnerved even seasoned officers. What stood out to her was the precision of the abduction. Whoever had intercepted Allison knew the bus schedule down to the minute. They'd chosen a stretch of road with minimal visibility from nearby farms, timed the encounter during the narrow window between student drop-off and depot arrival, and executed the disappearance without witnesses or noise. The impersonator had needed less than 5 minutes. Cole began cross-referencing local police rosters, security companies, and private contractors who might have access to uniforms or badges. Dozens of leads emerged and dissolved under scrutiny. Rental records for law enforcement-style vehicles yielded nothing unusual. Uniform suppliers showed no recent bulk orders. A handful of hobbyists and collectors owned old badges, but none matched the counterfeit found in the field. The fake ID itself contained one overlooked detail. The serial number on the badge corresponded to a defunct agency in neighboring Florida. Cole traced that number through procurement archives until she located a surplus auction, listing from 1999. Among the items sold were expired highway patrol badges, non-functional but authentic, purchased by a man named Daniel Keene. The name on the fake ID suddenly had weight. Keene's address led investigators to a P.O. box in Valdosta and eventually to a small auto body shop operating under the name Southway Repairs. The shop's owner, a 45-year-old mechanic named Warren Dillard, claimed to have bought the badges for movie props in a local film project that never materialized. Dillard was cooperative, even offering his receipts, but something in his easy manner bothered Cole. He lived alone, kept meticulous records, and had a reputation for volunteering as a reserve deputy during county fairs, a role that required only minimal background checks. When questioned about his whereabouts on October 12, 2001, he produced time cards showing he'd worked from 6 a.m. to 5 p.m., verified by an employee signature. The alibi seemed airtight and Cole moved on, but she kept his file marked with a red tab. Meanwhile, the Grangers refused to let the case die. Marla organized a candlelight vigil every month on the 12th, her trembling voice leading hymns under the courthouse flagpole. Ray installed motion lights around their property and spent his nights in the garage, repairing engines that weren't broken just to keep his hands busy. He called the sheriff's office daily, sometimes twice, asking if there was any news. The deputies stopped answering after a while, redirecting him to a voicemail inbox labeled Public Inquiries. When Agent Cole visited the Grangers in March, she found the living room transformed into a miniature command center. Maps of Brenton and Calhoun counties covered the walls, dotted with colored pins marking every sighting, rumor, and dead end. Marla showed her a binder of newspaper clippings, some from as far away as Kentucky and South Carolina, where witnesses claimed to have seen a young woman matching Allison's description. Cole gently explained that eyewitness memory was unreliable after 6 months. Marla listened politely, then handed her a stack of fresh flyers and asked her to take them back to Atlanta. The case's first anniversary came and went without ceremony from law enforcement. Cole, reassigned to a child exploitation task force, left the GBI office with one unfinished report and a sense of failure that would haunt her career. The county replaced Sheriff Landers with a younger man, Sheriff Nolan Pierce, who promised modern policing. but inherited a department demoralized by years of dead ends. Sure, you're subscribed to stay updated on more cases like this. These families deserve to have their stories told, and your support helps ensure these victims are never forgotten. Allison's disappearance slid quietly into the stack of cold cases. But Brenton County didn't forget. Every Halloween, the children whispered stories about the ghost bus that still rolled down Route 17, its headlights flickering in the fog. The older residents avoided the subject entirely, as if naming it might conjure whatever darkness had swallowed that girl. Years passed. Technology advanced. The bus rusted in the impound yard until it was auctioned to a salvage company in 2008. The evidence boxes were transferred to the State Archive in Macon, and yet the file continued to breathe faintly in the background of Georgia's unsolved crimes, its mystery preserved by the sheer absurdity of its details. A locked bus, an empty road, a false patrolman who seemed to vanish back into the fields. The case returned to life unexpectedly in 2016, when the Georgia Cold Case Review Unit reopened a series of investigations involving police impersonation and rural abductions. DNA testing had evolved dramatically since 2001, allowing analysts to extract genetic material from items once considered too contaminated or degraded. Among the samples stored from the Granger case were fibers from the driver's seat and a partial fingerprint lifted from the interior mirror. The print had been too smudged for classification in 2001, but new scanning algorithms enhanced its ridges sufficiently to yield a partial match in the national database. The name that surfaced startled investigators. Warren Dillard, the same man Agent Cole had once interviewed and released. Dillard's fingerprint had entered the system after a misdemeanor arrest in 2010 for illegal firearm possession. The print alignment wasn't conclusive. Only 8 of 12 ridge points matched, but it was enough to warrant renewed attention. Detective Thomas Hale, a former Army CID investigator newly assigned to the cold case unit, requested the complete file. He was methodical like Cole, but colder, with the patience of a man who'd built careers from the long decay of evidence. Hale visited Brenton County in February 2017, parking his rental sedan beside the same road where Bus 42 had once stood. The sugarcane had long since been replaced by soybeans, the horizon open and unguarded. He stood there for an hour, listening to the wind. "Every abduction leaves noise," he muttered into his recorder. "We just stopped listening too soon." Hale began by reconstructing the timeline digitally, feeding decades-old reports into mapping software. He overlaid the road's elevation, radio signal coverage, and vehicle movement data from school records. Then he expanded the perimeter to include cellular towers active on the morning of October 12, 2001. There were only 2 towers serving that corridor at the time. One of them recorded a brief outgoing call at 8:12 a.m., 4 minutes after Allison's last known sighting, originating from a prepaid phone purchased in Valdosta. The call lasted 12 seconds and connected to a local auto shop's landline. The number belonged to Southway Repairs. Hale traced the record backward through deactivated service accounts and discovered that the phone had been registered to a shell company later linked to Dillard's business. When confronted with this new evidence, Dillard appeared unfazed. He still owned the same house, the same shop, and the same calm demeanor that had unsettled Agent Cole years earlier. He told Hale that the prepaid phone had been used for after-hours service calls and that any connection to the case was coincidental. Hale noted the lack of emotion in his voice, the precision of his answers, the absence of curiosity about why the case had returned after 15 years. Over the next months, Hale built a forensic profile that paralleled Dillard's habits with the behavioral traits of known police impersonators. Dillard owned multiple vehicles, including an unmarked white Crown Victoria, identical to decommissioned state patrol cars from the late 1990s. In his workshop, Hale found a pegboard holding various reflective vests, signal batons, and a handheld radio tuned to public safety frequencies. None of it was illegal in itself, but the collection painted a picture of a man who liked the idea of authority without the accountability that came with it. Hale sent every item for trace analysis. On the back of one vest, laboratory technicians found a faint smear of female DNA. The profile was partial, but sufficient to exclude all known female relatives of Dillard. When compared against the national database, it yielded a hit, not to Allison herself, but to her mother. The probability of parental relation was calculated at 99.98%. The conclusion was unmistakable. The DNA belonged to Allison Granger. 18 years after her disappearance, science had finally placed her in the same physical space as Warren Dillard. The finding reignited the investigation. The Georgia Attorney General's office authorized a covert operation to monitor Dillard's activities. Hale obtained a warrant to track his vehicles and intercept communications. Over the following months, Dillard's routine proved monotonous: shop, grocery store, church, home. But one behavior stood out. Every Friday near sunset, he drove south along Route 17, stopping briefly near the stretch once bordered by cane fields. There, he sat motionless for exactly 6 minutes before turning back toward town. The ritual never varied. Hale suspected the location held significance, either the abduction site or a disposal area. Ground-penetrating radar scans of the roadside yielded no anomalies. However, aerial surveys revealed a dried irrigation pond 50 yards beyond the current soybean boundary. County records showed the pond had been drained and refilled multiple times for crop rotation, making it an unlikely search site in 2001. Hale requested permission to excavate. In May 2019, under cover of an agricultural maintenance operation, forensic crews began digging. At a depth of 4 feet, they found fragments of nylon fabric consistent with the seat covers used in early 2000s school buses. 12 inches deeper lay what remained of human skeletal elements: tibia, radius, jawbone, scattered but intact enough for identification. DNA confirmation arrived 1 week later. The remains belonged to Allison Granger. News of the discovery broke on local television before the sheriff's office could control the narrative. Reporters flooded Brenton County, their cameras framing the soybean fields where a ghost had finally been exhumed. Marla and Ray stood behind yellow tape, silent, holding hands. They'd spent 18 years preparing for that moment, and yet found themselves unprepared for the finality of it. The following morning, Hale and a tactical team executed a search warrant on Dillard's property. They found him in his workshop, polishing a badge-shaped keychain. When confronted with the DNA evidence and skeletal recovery, he didn't protest innocence. He simply said, "I thought the ground would keep her." His arrest sent shockwaves through the community. The trusted mechanic, the volunteer deputy, the man who'd fixed church vans and coached youth baseball, was suddenly the face of betrayal. For years, he'd walked among them wearing a counterfeit image of authority, fooling a county that equated uniforms with virtue. The trial would come later, the confessions in fragments, the motives blurred by delusion and control. But in that moment, on the morning of May 23, 2019, Brenton County exhaled a breath it had been holding for 18 years. The sugarcane had long since been cut down, but the ghosts it hid had finally spoken. The first interrogation of Warren Dillard began at 8:37 a.m. on May 24, 2019, inside Interview Room 2 at the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's Valdosta field office. The room was 10 by 12 feet, pale gray, air-conditioned to a chill meant to slow sweating suspects. Dillard sat cuffed to the table, eyes fixed on the digital clock above the door, as if measuring out the last minutes of the life he'd spent pretending to be someone else. Detective Thomas Hale kept his voice even, offering coffee, explaining Miranda rights, and placing a single photograph on the table, the recovered badge, its cheap laminate clouded with age. Dillard stared at it for a long time before saying, almost politely, "That's not mine anymore." His tone wasn't defensive. It was resigned, like a man returning stolen property. The confession unfolded in fragments, each requiring patience to extract, each contradicting the last. He claimed first that he'd only meant to stop Allison because she was driving erratic, that he'd flashed the fake ID as a warning, not a trap. When Hale asked why she was found buried beneath soil he'd leased for crop rotation, Dillard paused, exhaled, and said, "Because she screamed, and I couldn't let her." The words hung in the cold air like condensation, then dissolved into silence. Over the next 6 hours, Dillard drifted between lucidity and delusion. He described a compulsion he called the order, a belief that certain people had to be tested for obedience. "She didn't fail," he murmured once. "She just wouldn't wait." Psychologists later called his reasoning narcissistic ritualization, the transformation of authority into moral theater. He'd built the uniform as a costume to restore power lost through years of invisibility. As a mechanic, he'd fixed other men's vehicles. As a fake trooper, he could command them. The mask had become the man. When he realized Allison recognized the badge's flaws, the uneven font, the missing state seal, panic had overridden fantasy. The strike against the bus's steel doorframe had been enough. It was quick, he said. I didn't plan quick. Hale listened without interruption, recording every syllable. The details matched forensic findings. A cranial fracture consistent with impact. Microscopic traces of bus paint on bone. Dillard's story was the missing thread that finally tied evidence to consequence. Yet Hale felt no satisfaction, only the familiar numbness of conclusion. After years of chasing ghosts, he'd caught one made of paper and authority. News of the confession detonated through Brenton County like a controlled explosion. Television crews parked outside the courthouse. True crime bloggers dissected every sentence from the leaked transcripts. Local residents who'd once refused interviews now volunteered memories of Dillard that, in hindsight, felt ominous. The way he lingered near the bus depot offering to inspect brakes, the habit of driving his Crown, Vic with a spotlight attached for fun. Each recollection rewrote the town's collective memory, transforming ordinary kindnesses into warning signs everyone had ignored. Pastor Hewitt's Sunday sermon that week abandoned scripture entirely. Evil doesn't wear horns, he told his congregation. It borrows the uniform we trust. The congregation sat in silence until the organist began to cry. Marla Granger refused interviews at first. When she finally spoke on record 2 weeks later, her voice was steady, stripped of everything except clarity. He took her because he could, she said. He thought the badge made him untouchable. For 18 years he was right. She held a small pendant containing soil from the recovery site and wore it during every hearing. Ray sat beside her, shoulders squared but eyes unfocused, as though the courtroom lights had blinded him. The prosecution built its case methodically. DNA from Allison on the vest, microfibers linking her jacket to Dillard's truck, the prepaid phone call connecting him to the crime window, and his own recorded admissions. The defense attempted to frame the confession as coerced and Dillard's mental state as dissociative, but the jury didn't waver. After 9 days of testimony and 3 hours of deliberation, they returned a verdict of guilty on all counts: kidnapping, felony murder, and impersonating a peace officer. The sentence, life without parole. The trial closed one chapter, but opened another in the court of public opinion. Editorials in state newspapers questioned how a man with known access to decommissioned police equipment could evade oversight for years. The Department of Public Safety launched an internal review of badge disposal protocols, discovering that hundreds of obsolete credentials had been sold at auctions without record of buyers. The revelation triggered statewide reforms and a new bill nicknamed Allison's Law, banning resale of official insignia and mandating serial verification for all law enforcement identifiers. For the Grangers, the legislation was both vindication and wound. Marla told reporters, "It shouldn't take a child's death to teach grown men how to guard a badge." Meanwhile, Detective Hale compiled his final report, a 300-page chronology tracing the case from October 12, 2001 to May 2019. In the appendix, he included a personal note rarely permitted in official documentation. Truth is not found in evidence alone, but in the persistence of those who refuse to stop asking. When he delivered the report to the Grangers, Marla read that line twice, then asked if he believed in closure. Hale shook his head. "There's only clarity," he said. "It feels colder, but it's real." Brenton County spent the summer rebuilding its sense of safety. School buses received GPS tracking and dash cameras. Deputies underwent new training on community verification protocols. The road where Allison vanished was renamed Granger Route, though locals still called it the Cane Road. Tourists stopped to take photographs of the small memorial sign, a brass plate mounted on an oak post reading, "She brought them home every morning." By August, weeds had grown around the base, but someone always trimmed them before sunrise. In prison, Dillard adapted to anonymity. Guards noted his obsession with routine, polishing shoes until they shone, folding clothes with military precision, addressing staff as "Sir." Psych evaluators described a paradoxical calm, the serenity of a man who'd surrendered control by confessing. During one session, he asked a doctor whether police impersonation counted as faith. "People believed me," he said. "Isn't belief the point?" The doctor noted the statement as evidence of narcissistic detachment. When news arrived that Allison's Law had passed unanimously, Dillard reportedly smiled and said, "Hit the like button if you believe cold cases deserve more attention." She outranked me after all. Outside the prison walls, the case became textbook material. Criminal justice seminars dissected it under modules on symbolic authority crime. Forensic students studied the chain of custody errors that delayed DNA testing by a decade. One investigative podcast produced a 7-part series titled The Uniform in the Fields, blending dramatized narration with Hale's real audio recordings. The first episode opened with the sound of cicadas and a narrator's whisper, "Trust is a badge." Too easily forged. Yet for Brenton's residents, the story never quite ended. Every October, the elementary school held a safety assembly in Allison's memory. Former students, now parents, told their children about the driver who knew every name, who kept the radio low so she could listen to their morning dreams, who vanished, but somehow still delivered them safely to the lessons that would outlive her. Marla kept the recovered bus number plate on her mantel. One evening in 2020, she received a letter from Agent Miriam Cole, retired but still haunted by unfinished cases. The letter was brief. "I never stopped thinking about her." The world finally caught up to what she deserved. Marla folded it into the case binder, the last page in a story written by too many hands. Detective Hale transferred to a federal task force the following year. In his farewell report to the county, he summarized the case's essence in a single line. "Monsters don't hide in darkness. They hide in procedure." The phrase circulated through training academies and eventually appeared engraved on a memorial plaque at the GBI Academy in Atlanta, dedicated to victims of law enforcement impersonation. 2 decades after that misty October morning, Route 17 still curves between open fields. The cane is gone, replaced by soy and cotton, but under certain dawns the air smells faintly of diesel and rain, as if Bus 42 were passing once more. Truckers claim that on fog-heavy mornings they see a flash of yellow ahead, lights blinking, a figure in a reflective vest waving them to slow down. Whether ghost or metaphor, no one tries to explain it. In Brenton County, belief is less about proof than about presence. When journalists ask Marla what justice feels like, she answers without hesitation. "It feels like a locked bus on an open road finally stopping somewhere that makes sense." Then she looks toward the horizon where the fields begin again, endless and quiet, and adds, "But I still hear the engine." When the verdict was read in the Lowndes County Courthouse, the air inside the chamber seemed to solidify. No one moved for several seconds, as though the words "guilty on all counts" had frozen sound itself. Reporters filed out to deliver live updates, jurors avoided eye contact, and the fluorescent lights hummed like a mechanical heartbeat. Only Detective Thomas Hale remained seated, hands folded, watching the defendant. Warren Dillard didn't look at him. He stared straight ahead, lips moving silently, perhaps reciting the same internal mantra that had justified every act, the belief that obedience made purity. For Hale, the trial's conclusion should have brought satisfaction. Instead, it left an absence, the hollow feeling investigators describe when the puzzle's image is complete, but something vital remains outside the frame. The evidence explained how Allison Granger had died, but not why her killer had believed himself chosen to wear a false uniform. Hale's instinct told him that Dillard's delusion had a history longer than a single crime. The weeks following the conviction were a blur of administrative closure. Case files were scanned, exhibits sealed, and press inquiries diverted to the Public Information Office. The Grangers returned to their quiet routines, visiting Allison's grave every Sunday at 7 a.m. sharp, the time she would have started her bus route. But Hale couldn't let go. During evidence archiving, he noticed something he'd overlooked, a manila envelope labeled "Ancillary Leads Discontinued." Inside were photocopies of 2 police reports from 1998 and 1999, both describing roadside stops in rural Georgia by an unidentified man posing as a trooper. The descriptions matched Dillard's appearance within a few years: medium build, receding hairline, calm voice, fake badge. The victims in those reports had escaped, dismissing the encounters as misunderstandings. Neither had been linked to serious crimes at the time. Hale realized Dillard's impersonations had begun years earlier. Allison had not been the first. She'd been the first who didn't survive. Hale reopened the reports and tracked down the women. One had moved to Tennessee, the other to Alabama. Both remembered the uniform clearly, the gray shirt without shoulder patches, the shiny badge with an off-center state seal. They recalled the same phrase. "Routine safety check, ma'am." He'd spoken politely, smiled, and returned to his car when they refused to exit their vehicles. Hale documented their statements and cross-referenced them with Dillard's employment records. Both incidents occurred during weekends when Dillard had requested time off from the auto shop. The timeline aligned too neatly to ignore, yet prosecutors, satisfied with their life sentence, declined to pursue new charges. Hale knew bureaucracy preferred closure to completeness. The discovery gnawed at him. He began reviewing statewide databases of unsolved abductions between 1995 and 2005, focusing on cases involving vehicles, rural roads, and impersonation of authority. Patterns emerged: a missing postal worker in 1997, a college student in 1999 last seen pulled over on Interstate 75, a mother of two from Tifton who vanished after calling her husband to say she'd been stopped by a trooper. Each case had been investigated in isolation. Each remained unsolved. Hale compiled them into a matrix of names, locations, and incident details pinned across his apartment wall. 27 pins, 27 potential echoes of Dillard's method. He presented his findings to the Georgia Cold Case Unit in November 2019. The room fell silent as he described how Dillard's access to authentic badge materials through surplus auctions could have allowed him to travel across counties posing as an officer. Supervisors listened politely, nodded, and reminded him that his jurisdiction ended with the Granger case. Without physical evidence, they said the theory was speculative. Hale left the meeting furious. He'd spent years teaching new agents that patterns were the lifeblood of investigation, yet now he was being told to ignore them because they complicated an already tidy narrative. The system had its own kind of denial, one built from fear of reopening old failures. By winter, Hale had taken leave from the Bureau. Officially, it was to pursue academic consultation. Unofficially, it was obsession. He rented a small office near the Valdosta airport and filled it with cardboard boxes containing photocopied files from county archives. He read until dawn, tracing the geography of fear across decades of Georgia highways. He found fragments, witnesses describing a white sedan with a roof light, a counterfeit badge recovered from a ditch, a survivor who'd identified her attacker's voice as calm and practiced. The cumulative weight suggested that Dillard's pathology had metastasized long before Allison. Whether he'd committed additional murders remained unproven, but Hale's intuition, honed through years of behavioral analysis, told him the pattern wasn't coincidence. Uniform predation, he called it, a predator hiding in the silhouette of trust. Meanwhile, Brenton County adjusted uneasily to its fame. Documentaries arrived, podcasts multiplied, and tourism followed. True crime enthusiasts photographed the cane fields, leaving trinkets on the memorial sign. The sheriff's department installed a small plaque at the site reading "Justice served May 2019," though locals complained the words sounded too proud for something so grim. Pastor Hewitt's congregation dwindled under the weight of curiosity seekers who attended Sunday service, just to glimpse the place where the fake trooper lived, the town that had once hidden its pain behind silence, now hid it behind performance. For the Grangers, media attention felt like a second violation. Producers offered six-figure deals for exclusive rights, which they declined. Marla returned to factory work, preferring anonymity to interviews. Ray volunteered at the local bus depot, inspecting safety locks. When asked why, he said, "Someone has to keep the doors honest." Their home remained a private museum. Case photos, newspaper clippings, Hale's final report bound in a leather folder. Every anniversary brought new visitors, journalists, criminology students, strangers seeking catharsis through proximity to tragedy. Marla served them coffee and sent them away with the same advice: don't mistake answers for peace. In January 2020, Hale received a letter from the GBI's new director, inviting him to consult on a training module about forensic persistence. The irony wasn't lost on him. Bureaucracy rebranding obsession as virtue. Still, he accepted. His first lecture began with a slide of a blank badge outline. "Every system creates its own camouflage," he told the recruits. "The moment you stop questioning the symbols of authority, you've already lost the case." He ended with a photograph of Bus 42, taken from the evidence archive. "This," he said, "is what silence looks like when it's wearing a uniform. But obsession has gravity, After the lecture, Hale returned to his office and reopened the matrix. He noticed that several incidents from the late 1990s clustered along Highway 41, all within 15 miles of Dillard's former residence. The victims shared one chilling detail. Each had described their assailant using the exact phrase, "officer on inspection duty." That wording didn't exist in Georgia Patrol vernacular. It was Dillard's personal invention. Hale realized the phrase had appeared in reports from 3 counties spanning 8 years. He wasn't chasing phantoms. He was tracing a pattern that predated Allison by almost a decade. He contacted federal analysts specializing in geographic profiling, feeding them the data. Their model predicted that the suspect's operational base during the earlier incidents centered within a 5-mile radius of Valdosta, precisely where Dillard's auto shop had been. The algorithm's accuracy margin was 92%. It wasn't proof, but it was enough for Hale to believe that the ghost road between the fields was only one chapter in a longer, darker story. That spring, storms swept through southern Georgia, tearing roofs from barns and flooding rural roads. When cleanup crews drained an abandoned irrigation canal near Tifton, they uncovered a rusted sedan buried under decades of silt. Inside were fragments of uniform fabric, a badge identical to Dillard's counterfeit, and a woman's hair ribbon sealed in a plastic bag. DNA matched a missing person from 1999, one of the 27 names on Hale's wall. The discovery confirmed his suspicion. Allison's killer had practiced. She'd been his refinement, not his experiment. Hale called Marla personally before the press release. There were others, he said. She paused, then replied. Then she stopped him. It was the first time he'd heard her voice without sorrow. In the years that followed, state agencies quietly reopened several cold cases under a unified operation named Project Obsidian. Officially, it was a review of impersonation-related crimes. Unofficially, it was an admission that the system had been blind to its own reflection. Hale returned as consultant, traveling from county to county teaching investigators how to recognize false authority. His lectures carried a single refrain: a badge is proof of duty, not virtue. By late 2021, Dillard's health had deteriorated. He refused interviews but sent one letter to the bureau that began, "You found my footprints late, but at least you learned to look." The warden intercepted it before it reached Hale, yet copies circulated among agents as morbid artifact. It closed with a sentence underlined twice: "The road was never empty." No one knew what he meant. Some believed he referred to accomplices, others to ghosts. Hale read the line and thought of the endless cane fields, the hum of engines, and the illusion of solitude that had sheltered a predator for so long. When Dillard died in prison in 2022, the news barely made headlines. The county refused to host a burial. His body was cremated and the ashes left unclaimed. Pastor Hewitt performed a quiet service at dawn, quoting from Ecclesiastes, "That which is crooked cannot be made straight." Only 2 guards attended. Hale didn't. He was standing instead on Route 17, where soybeans swayed in the morning wind, dictating his final field note into the recorder. Case closed, but echo ongoing. The wind distorted the words, scattering them into the static of open air. Brenton County moved on the way rural places do, slowly, through habit rather than healing. Children grew up hearing cautionary tales of flashing lights and false authority. The memorial by the road remained tidy, its brass plaque polished by strangers. Every year on the anniversary, the county buses lined up in parade formation, drivers honking once in unison at 8:07 a.m. The sound rolled across the fields like thunder, a ritual of remembrance disguised as routine. For most, the story of Bus 42 became legend, a warning about trust and power. But for those who remembered the smell of diesel that morning, it remained something deeper, proof that evil could pass inspection if you only glanced at the badge. The morning Warren Dillard's obituary ran on page 4 of the Valdosta Daily Times. The headline was smaller than the grocery ads beneath it. Convicted impersonator dies at 66. There was no mention of the victims, no recap of the trial, just 2 sentences confirming that the body had been cremated at state expense. For most readers, it marked the quiet end of a story they had already processed, archived, and filed under solved. But for Detective Thomas Hale, the article was the beginning of something new. He clipped it, folded it into his notebook, and wrote across the margin in block letters, "Silence doesn't end with a verdict." By 2023, Project Obsidian had expanded beyond Georgia. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit adopted Hale's methodology for identifying symbolic authority offenders, criminals who used official imagery to gain compliance. Data from 15 states revealed over 100 unresolved cases involving impersonation of police, fire, or military personnel, most clustered in rural areas with limited oversight. The pattern disturbed even hardened investigators. Fake uniforms, temporary authority, and victims chosen for their willingness to obey. The project's findings suggested a psychological contagion, the way one man's pathology could echo through copycats inspired by media coverage of his crimes. Hale, reluctantly pulled into federal consultancy, warned the task force that every headline gives permission to another mask. His office walls in Quantico were papered with maps again. Each pushpin represented an instance where trust had been weaponized. An unlicensed officer conducting fake traffic stops in Texas, a volunteer firefighter caught entering homes without calls, a private security contractor impersonating federal agents. The same pattern repeated. Authority assumed, power abused, silence maintained. Hale's reports became increasingly philosophical, filled with notes that read more like confessions than observations. "We built the uniform to identify safety," one entry said. "Now it identifies compliance." He began traveling, teaching seminars under the title The Psychology of Obedience Crimes. His audiences, cadets, forensic students, public administrators, listened with the fascination reserved for tragedy-turned-lesson. They asked about the Granger case, about the ghost bus, about Dillard's mind. Hale always answered clinically, but privately the story had grown into something mythic in his thoughts. He could still see the sugarcane fields when he closed his eyes, could still hear the phantom diesel hum that locals swore returned every October. The line between evidence and legend blurred, and somewhere in that haze Hale began to sense that understanding evil required stepping too close to its logic. During a symposium in Baton Rouge, a young trainee asked him, "How do you tell a real badge from a fake one?" Hale paused longer than expected. "You can't," he said finally. "You tell the person, not the symbol." But most people don't look that long. The quote spread across policing forums and social media, stripped of context, reinterpreted as cynicism. Hale became both a prophet and a pariah. Departments invited him to speak, but administrators worried his message undermined trust in the institution. The Bureau reassigned him to research duties, effectively sidelining the man whose work they had once celebrated. In solitude, Hale returned to the unsolveds he'd collected, 27 names reduced to fragments of incident reports and faded photographs. One file in particular drew him back. A 1995 disappearance near Ocala, Florida, 2 years before Dillard's earliest known impersonation. The victim, a motel clerk named Grace Warren, had vanished after finishing her shift. Witnesses described a man in a gray uniform waiting by a parked patrol car in the lot. The badge number in the report, 4421, matched the surplus batch Dillard had purchased in 1999. It shouldn't have been possible, unless Dillard had acquired them earlier or someone else had. Hale cross-referenced auction records and discovered a second buyer listed on the same invoice. Michael W. Dillard, a brother. The revelation sent him spiraling. The possibility of an accomplice, perhaps a relative, perhaps a mentor, reframed everything. He traced the name through public databases. Michael Dillard, born 1953, former county code inspector, deceased 2015 from heart failure. But property records showed the two brothers co-owned several storage units near Lake Park until 2012. Hale obtained a warrant to access the abandoned lockers. Inside, beneath decades of dust, investigators found a collection of uniforms, sheriff's shirts, trooper hats, security patches, each labeled with masking tape and year notations. In one box lay a stack of blank ID cards identical to those used in the Granger case. On the lid was a single handwritten word, spares. DNA swabs from the uniforms revealed traces of both brothers. Forensics also detected biological residue from 2 unidentified female profiles, later linked to unsolved disappearances from 2000 and 2002. The discovery proved that Dillard hadn't acted alone, at least not always. His brother's death had sealed one mouth, but the evidence spoke loudly enough. Hale's theory evolved again. Perhaps impersonation for them had been a family ritual, a shared obsession with authority inherited like property. a sickness disguised as order. When Hale presented the findings to federal leadership, they reacted with discomfort rather than shock. Officially, the Bureau declined to reopen cases tied to deceased suspects, citing resource prioritization. Hale called it cowardice. "We create monsters," he said during a closed meeting, "and then bury them under policy." His words were stricken from the minutes. Within months, he requested early retirement. He moved back to Georgia, renting a small house near the edge of Brenton County, close enough to smell the soy fields that had replaced the cane. Locals recognized him from television but left him alone. He spent evenings walking Route 17, voice recorder in hand, dictating reflections that blended investigation with meditation. "Authority," one tape begins, "is a mirror that reflects whoever stares long enough. Some see protection, others see permission." The recordings would later be compiled by criminology students into an audio archive titled The Mirror Badge Tapes. Marla Granger listened to one of them years later when invited to speak at a victim advocacy conference. On the tape, Hale's voice wavered slightly, tired but unwavering. "Every lie wears a costume. Ours just comes with a certification number." She stood before the audience and said, "He understood what none of them wanted to admit, that you can't reform trust with legislation. You can only rebuild it, person by person." Her words echoed through the hall, quiet but durable. By 2024, Project Obsidian had morphed into a permanent federal task force investigating misuse of insignia. The first national audit revealed thousands of missing or untracked law enforcement credentials across the country. Some had been stolen, others sold legally, most simply lost in bureaucratic fog. The public reacted with disbelief that such negligence was possible. Senate hearings convened. Journalists invoked Allison's name as catalyst. Hale refused to testify. He wrote a letter instead, entered into record, "A badge is not a promise. It's a question. Who are you when no one verifies?" The line made headlines. That same year, a group of citizen researchers discovered an online marketplace selling replica badges nearly identical to genuine ones. Among the sellers was an account named Trooper Keen 2001. The name of Dillard's fake identity had become a brand for collectors. When reporters asked Hale for comment, he said only, "The story repeats because it flatters authority." The site was eventually shut down, but the point remained. The myth had outlived the man. In the summer of 2025, Hale returned once more to the site of the original bus discovery. The county had paved a new service road over part of the old Route 17. The air smelled of asphalt and cut grass instead of diesel. A maintenance worker recognized him and nodded silently. Hale stood there for nearly an hour, listening to nothing but cicadas. Then he placed a single laminated card on the soil, his own retired identification, and whispered, "No one should wear this alone." He left it there, face down, to decay under rain and time. Back in town, the Grangers kept their quiet routine. Marla's hair had gone silver. Ray used a cane. They no longer attended public vigils, but maintained the memorial privately, cleaning the brass plaque each October. One evening, a reporter found them sitting on their porch and asked what they thought of all the reforms, the national awareness, the documentaries. Marla looked at the horizon where the fields met the sky and said, "It's good they're watching now." But watching isn't the same as seeing. Hale never returned to public life. His final known communication was a short note to the director of the Bureau. "Casework complete. The rest belongs to memory." He died quietly in early 2026, his heart stopping during sleep. On his desk, investigators found a neatly labeled folder titled Unverified. Inside were copies of missing person flyers, none connected to any known case, all marked with a single phrase scrawled across the top. Someone believed them. When his personal effects were archived, a technician noticed that one of the voice recorders still contained an unfinished message. The final words, distorted by static, were, "If you ever forget what happened here, drive Route 17 at dawn. The road remembers better than we do." The wind along Route 17 had changed. The soy and cotton that replaced the cane whispered with a softer rhythm, the scent of fertilizer now sharper than diesel. Locals said the road had lost its hum, that after Hale's death even the ghosts had gone quiet. But at dawn, when fog hugged the ditches and the sun cracked through in broken gold, the air still carried something, a vibration beneath hearing, a pulse that seemed to come from the earth itself. Drivers slowed without knowing why. The highway, after all, had learned caution. In 2027, the state erected a small visitors' pull-off at mile marker 214, the spot where Allison Granger's bus had once been found. It wasn't a tourist attraction so much as an uneasy compromise between memory and commerce. A bronze placard read, "In honor of all who placed trust in the wrong badge." Beneath it, smaller letters added, "Dedicated to Allison Granger and Detective Thomas Hale." Someone in the design office had argued the two names didn't belong together. A victim and an investigator shouldn't share the same space, but the committee decided the case had bound them beyond roles. The sign faced east, so the first light of each morning struck it directly, blinding for a second, as if the sun itself were giving testimony. Visitors came steadily. Some left flowers. Others laminated copies of driver safety pledges signed by students in crimson ink. A retired trooper from Savannah left his own service badge, taped to the post, engraved side down. By midsummer, the base of the sign looked like an altar built from everyday faith. License plates, keychains, handwritten prayers. Every object carried the same message: we believe, but verify. For Marla Granger, the memorial offered neither comfort nor irritation. "It's a mile marker, not a miracle," she told the local paper. Yet she still visited every October 12th, setting a coffee thermos beside the plaque, the same brand Allison had favored on her morning routes. She poured a little onto the soil, whispering, "For the road." Ritual, not religion, kept her steady. Ray Granger rarely spoke during those visits. He simply polished the sign with the hem of his jacket until it gleamed. Silence had become his language. Across the state, Project Obsidian continued evolving. Federal reports credited the program with uncovering 43 additional impersonation-related crimes nationwide. Training academies introduced a new discipline called authority integrity analysis, teaching recruits to document every instance of badge transfer, disposal, or duplication. Instructors opened each course with a phrase lifted from Hale's lectures: "Every uniform should fear the mirror." Young officers repeated it like a creed, half understood but instinctively right. The Bureau even named its new ethics library the Hale Archives, though the irony wasn't lost on those who knew how the institution had once silenced him. Meanwhile, a different kind of investigation unfolded in universities. Sociologists treated the Brenton County case as cultural artifact, analyzing how a community metabolized fear. One paper, Uniform Mythologies and Rural Faith, argued that Dillard's disguise succeeded because small towns conflate authority with familiarity. "The badge worked," the author wrote, "because it sounded like home." Another study mapped the spread of folklore. Truckers claiming to see a yellow bus in the fog. Children insisting a woman in reflective gear waved them to safety near mile 214. The line between commemoration and haunting blurred, and scholars began referring to the phenomenon as the Granger effect, a communal hallucination born from collective guilt. By 2028, Brenton's population had nearly doubled. A logistics company built a distribution hub on the outskirts, bringing jobs, neon signs, and transients. Newcomers heard the story secondhand, filtered through documentaries that stylized it with ominous music and drone shots. To them, Allison Granger was a symbol, not a person. Thomas Hale, a tragic archetype, not a man who drank gas station coffee at 3 a.m. The town's oldest residents kept the quieter version, the one measured in long silences at diner counters, in the way headlights dimmed when passing the memorial. Every retelling bent the truth slightly, until fact and folklore coexisted like overlapping transparencies. The official narrative ended in justice. The local one ended in a question that no verdict could answer. How many believed before they checked? Marla watched this transformation with detached tolerance. She allowed the documentaries but declined interviews. "They'll turn it into content either way," she said to Ray. "Might as well let them get the details right." When she finally did speak publicly, an anniversary panel at the University of Georgia, her speech lasted less than 5 minutes. "He wore the symbol," she told the auditorium, "but we built the meaning. We can build it different." The students rose in spontaneous applause, though many later admitted they didn't fully grasp what she meant. The line still circulated online as an inspirational quote superimposed on photographs of badges polished to mirror brightness. The same year, the Mirror Badge tapes were released as a limited-run podcast. Each episode used Hale's original recordings, intercut with interviews from victims' families and experts. Critics called it haunting, a eulogy disguised as training. Episode 7, Route 17 at Dawn, ended with a simple field recording. Wind through soy plants, distant thunder, and the faint metallic click of a lighter. The sound of Hale igniting his final cigarette beside the memorial weeks before his death. Listeners flooded forums debating whether the audio contained a whispered voice saying, "Slow down." Engineers denied it, but belief, once seated, needs little proof. That same autumn, a group of high school seniors from Brenton produced a short documentary titled The Bus Driver's Lesson. Shot on borrowed cameras, it alternated between reenactment and reflection. The final scene showed a new driver closing the bus door, locking it from inside, and whispering, "Everyone accounted for." The film won a state award and played at a regional festival. Marla attended quietly in the back row. When credits rolled, the audience stood. She remained seated, smiling faintly. Afterward, she told the director, "You made her drive again." It was the closest she'd come to peace. In 2029, a journalist researching a book on impersonation crimes requested access to Hale's personal archives. Among the boxes, he found a sealed envelope labeled "For Whoever Keeps Asking." Inside was a single page handwritten in Hale's meticulous block script. "We solve crimes to stop repetition, but repetition is how stories stay alive." Maybe remembering is the real sentence. The line became the epigraph of the book The Authority Illusion, which went on to win awards and reignite public interest. Sales funded scholarships for victims' families pursuing criminal justice degrees. The first recipient was a Brenton County senior named Jamie Lopez, who planned to become a forensic analyst. At her commencement speech, she said, "They taught us to verify the badge. I want to verify the truth." That winter, an ice storm swept through southern Georgia, blanketing Route 17 in glassy frost. Utility crews shut down the highway for 2 days. When the thaw came, locals found the memorial sign untouched, its brass lettering shining against the gray sky. The newspaper ran a photo with the caption, "Still Standing." Online commenters argued about symbolism. The older generation just nodded. Some stories, they said, are too stubborn to melt. By 2030, the case had entered textbooks, summarized in half-page sidebars under forensic breakthroughs. Students read about the 2001 disappearance, the 2019 DNA match, the reforms that followed. Few lingered on the human details, the half-eaten breakfast, the locked bus, the silence that followed. But occasionally a teacher would assign the original case files as primary documents, and a student somewhere would pause over a photo. Tire tracks curving into fog, a single coffee mug on a dashboard. They would wonder what it meant to trust something that could betray by imitation. That question, Hale might have said, was the curriculum itself. On the 20th anniversary of the conviction, Brenton hosted a candlelight vigil. Fewer than 50 people attended, mostly second-generation residents. The pastor read a short prayer. No cameras were present. As candles flickered in the wind, one child asked why the lights had to stay until sunrise. Her mother answered, "Because the road needs to see us back." Around 6 a.m., as the first trucks began to roll by, a low horn sounded from the highway. Long, mournful, almost respectful. Some swore it came from an old bus engine. Others said it was just wind through drainage culverts. Either way, everyone turned toward the sound and listened. Later that morning, mist rose from the fields, wrapping the memorial in silver haze. The plaque glinted briefly, reflecting sunlight into the sky like a signal. Drivers approaching the bend slowed instinctively. None of them knew why, only that for a moment the air felt charged, alive with unseen memory. Then the feeling passed, leaving the ordinary rhythm of travel, the road stretching forward, the world insisting on continuation. If you drive Route 17 now, you'll see the mile marker gleaming like an eyelid in the morning light. The brass still bears the same engraving, though weather has softened its edges, in honor of all who place trust in the wrong badge. Below it, faintly scratched by some anonymous visitor, are new words, but learn to look. No one knows who carved them. Maybe a survivor, maybe a student, maybe just someone who stopped to rest. The message fits. The story began with blindness and ends with vision, not perfect, not permanent, but enough to keep the next traveler alert. The wind picks up again, carrying dust and the smell of cut grain. Somewhere far down the road, a horn sounds twice, short bursts like acknowledgement. Then only quiet. The highway continues, unbroken, leading into another morning that promises nothing except motion. And still, beneath the asphalt, beneath the layers of soil and memory, the earth keeps whispering the same thing it has whispered since that first impossible night in 2001. The road remembers.